Hello and Shabbat Shalom to all the children of Northwest. Today, Friday, is of course Erev Shabbat, and slightly different to the usual as we have the whole school doing one Kabbalat Shabbat together. It's the last Shabbat before the half term, and also it's the last Shabbat before Shavuot because we haven't got a Kabbalat Shabbat next week. And therefore I've been thinking to myself, what can I share with you in honor of Shavuot? And I'd like to share with you a story. It's a story that I just discovered literally a couple of days ago. There is a rabbi in the United States called Rabbi Yoel Gold, and he is a master storyteller. And he tells the story that came to light just literally recently about a gentleman who comes originally from Cleveland, which is in the United States. And his name is Stuart Mintz. And Stuart Mintz was born a long time ago, somewhere in the middle of the 1950s, in the United States. So he's not a youngster anymore. And he was born to a family that were not religious at all. And they used to go to shul maybe once or twice a year for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And then when he was a little bit older, in the 1980s, he actually made a trip to Israel with some friends. He had never been there before in his life, and he wanted to see what is Israel all about. His exposure to Judaism was a little bit of Sunday school, cheder that he used to go to, which stopped at his bar mitzvah. He had his bar mitzvah in shul, and that was the end of his Judaism. He didn't go to a Jewish primary school, he didn't go to a Jewish high school, and he wasn't really interested in being Jewish. He wasn't really interested in his religion. He only went to shul once or twice a year. Anyway, so sometime in the 1980s, he traveled to Israel with a group of friends. And they landed in Ben Gurion Airport early on a Friday morning, obviously completely exhausted. And there was also a big difference with jet lag and everything and the time difference. And they went to Jerusalem. They went to Yerushalayim. And they arrived in Yerushalayim and they toured a little bit on Friday afternoon, and then they checked into their hotel and went to sleep. And they wake up the following morning, Saturday morning, Shabbat morning. But they were really, really frustrated because they were ready to go out touring and doing and seeing. But everything was shut. The shops were shut. There were no buses, there were no trains, there were no taxis, restaurants were shut, nothing was doing. It was Shabbat, of course. So one of his friends suggested, you know what, why don't we do a bit of shul hopping? There's nothing else open, all the shuls are open, after all it was Saturday morning, let's do a bit of shul hopping. And he said, shul hopping? What do I want to do that for? I only go to shul on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. Even that I can't stand. What do I want to do? Come on, there's nothing else to do. So Stuart Mintz, I should say, decided, you know what, all right, let's tag along. So Stuart and his friends, they went round the different neighborhoods of Jerusalem, walking, of course, popping their heads into different shuls. But there was one shul that really caught their attention. And they walked into this shul. It was in fact a Hasidic shul. And the whole shul was completely white on the inside. And they kind of felt a little bit embarrassed, a little bit exposed, because these were Hasidim who wear these long black cloaks called bekisher, and they wear these big furry hats called a shtreimel, and they were not wearing the fur hats then because they all had the talis over their heads, and they were praying, and they kind of felt conspicuous coming in their t-shirts and shorts, or t-shirts and jeans. So they decided they'll go upstairs and look from the upstairs gallery and look down upon the men below. And they enter the gallery, and Stuart was completely awestruck because there he sees a group of men crowding around the bima, and they were reading from the Torah. And he thought to himself, wow, just look at this scene for a moment. It looks like a scene from, 2,000-3,000 years ago. It's almost as if time has stood still. And he just captured that scene, and he thought it was so powerful for him to see these people in the present day and age reading from this ancient text called the Torah. He went back to Cleveland and he thought to himself, I've got to discover what this Torah is all about. If there are people today who still read it and still study it and still learn from it all these thousands of years later, there's got to be something about it. And slowly, Stuart discovered and learned and started keeping Shabbat, started keeping kashrut, and so on forth. It was about 10 years after he had been to Israel that Stuart's father said to him, "Did I ever tell you the story of when you were a little baby?" He said, "Well, what story are you talking about?" So he said, "Well, you were a little baby, you were literally a few weeks old, and you suddenly became quite unwell, and you were rushed off to hospital, and you had a very, very serious blood condition. And we were really, really worried about you. At that time, my mother, that's your grandmother," said Mr. Mintz to his son Stuart, "was sitting at home. She was not religious herself, but she did have a mezuzah on her front door. And there was a knock on her door. And there was a young Hasidic rabbi there, and his name was Rabbi Menachem Mendel Taub, known as the Kalever Rebbe. Now, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Taub, boys and girls, and I'll show you a picture of him shortly, he was a saintly man. He passed away only a couple of years ago. He looked interesting because Hasidic Jews will never ever cut their beards or their payas. So they have very long payas and they usually have very long beards. The Kalever Rebbe, he had long payas, long white payas, but he had no beard. Kalever Rebbe had unfortunately suffered terribly during the Second World War. He was in an evil place called Auschwitz, and they had done very cruel things to him. But he miraculously survived. And one of the cruel things to him that they did to him was they pulled out his beard, and it never grew back. But he was indeed a very, very special man. And after the war, after he survived, he originally came from Hungary. He moved over to the United States and set up a community in Cleveland. And he knocked on the door of your grandmother, said Mr. Mintz to his son, Stuart. And she answered the door, said, "Can I help you?" So he said, "Yes, my name is Rabbi Taub, and we're starting a new community here in Cleveland. But there's one problem, is we don't have a Sefer Torah, and I am trying to raise money for a brand new Sefer Torah. Will you be willing to make a contribution to a Sefer Torah?" Now, nowadays, a Sefer Torah can cost something like £40,000, but this story took place a long time ago when there wasn't such inflation. So in those days, in the United States, it was about $3,500. And she asked, "How much does a whole Sefer Torah cost?" So he said, "A whole Sefer Torah is $3,500. It's a huge amount of money. It's, as I said before, it's probably about £40,000 in today's money." And the grandmother said, "I've got a grandson who's unwell. If you promise that the very first Shabbat that you use that Sefer Torah, you will say a special Mishaberach, a blessing for the recovery of my grandson who's unwell in hospital, I will give you all $3,500. And the rabbi said, "That's a deal." She took out her checkbook and she wrote out a check to this Rabbi Menachem Mendel Taub and handed him over a check for $3,500. Yes, you heard correct. That $3,500 was donated by your grandmother in the merit that you should recover. And then said Stuart to his dad, "What happened to that Sefer Torah now?" So he said, "Well, Rabbi Taub eventually decided to move to Israel. And he and his community moved to Israel, and he took his Sefer Torah with him." He said, one second. Where is his community? Where is his shul? And slowly the pieces of the puzzle came together until Stuart suddenly came to the realization, 10 years earlier as a young man, when he went with a group of friends to Israel, and he was watching these men gathered around the bima, reading from the Sefer Torah. That was the Sefer Torah that his grandmother had donated years earlier when he was a little baby. That Sefer Torah had saved his life twice. It saved his life physically when he was a baby, in whose merit he recovered from his grandmother donating the Sefer Torah. And it saved his life spiritually, boys and girls, because that was the Sefer Torah that ignited that spark, that brought him back to his nation, that brought him back to his people, and that brought him back to his Torah. An unbelievable story, I'm not making it up. Says Rabbi Yoel Gold, who tells over this story, he says, when we speak about the Torah, we say, Etz Chayim hi lamachazikim ba. It is a Etz Chayim, it is a living Torah, lamachazikim ba, to those who cling on to it. His grandmother, even though she wasn't religious, she clung onto the Torah, and she realized that it is such a worthy cause to buy a Sefer Torah. And in that merit, her grandson's life was saved when he was a baby physically, and was saved spiritually many years later when he saw those men reading from the Sefer Torah that his own grandmother had donated so many years earlier. And here is a picture of the Kalev Rebbe. This is a picture of the Kalev Rebbe. As you can see, he's got these long payas, but unfortunately hardly any beard. He's no longer alive, but he was indeed a very great man. And I was lucky to have seen him a few times in my life, and even on one occasion receive a bracha from him. So boys and girls, as we now are in the last days, literally 6 days before Shavuot, 6 days before we receive the Torah, we all need to cling on to the Torah. We all need to hold on to the Torah. It's an ancient text, but the text of the Torah and the messages of the Torah are alive today, just as they were when they were given to us 3,332 years ago. Children, I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. I also wish you and your families a Chag Sameach. Enjoy Shavuot and eat lots of cheesecake.